Mesdames et messieurs,
The greatest festival of our contemporary society, the Olympic Games, is about to begin.
This is going to be close.
Oh! They're all completely gassed! They've given it everything on the global bucket! Oh, yeah! Go! Oh!
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. But that is an Olympic championship.
Ready.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Keep the Flame Alive, the podcast for fans of the Olympics and Paralympics. If you love the games, we are the show for you. I'm your host, Jill Jaracz, joined as always by my lovely co-host, Alison Brown. Alison, hello, how are you?
I've realized I have not prepared any Italian for our
Oh,
intro
no.
later. So
Do we even have news? Milan-Cortina has been quiet.
well, we have one little piece of news.
Okay. Oh, bellissimo.
But I know I gotta think about this for a minute. So. Good thing we've got an interview.
Yeah, right. And while you think about that, let me remind people that we do have clothing in our store for the time being. And it's been a fun week dealing with intellectual property claims from the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee against our logo T-shirts. But while our store is still alive and active, it might be a good time for you to buy something if you were on the fence about buying some podcast merch. We have a store at TeePublic. It is Keep the Flame Alive. We will have a link to that in the show notes. We have all kinds of designs about our show and phobia, and we're getting some Milan-Cortina stuff up. You might want to check it out as we get closer to Milan-Cortina. We'll have other designs there available. Also, you can become an official vacuumer of the show or get your magical hour vacuuming shirt.
My favorite design.
I know, I love it. It's so cool. But that is tpublic.com. We have a link at the bottom of our website. We'll have a link in the show notes, and purchases there go to support our efforts to get to Milan-Cortina and have an independent show with trademarked items that we own the trademarks for. So check it out.
With a logo that the USOPC said was okay.
Yeah, right. And don't be swayed by other items at the TeePublic site that say Olympics. Just saying, tpublic.com. Anyway, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And, we're going into Mental Health Awareness Month with
a lot of awareness about our own mental health right now.
Right? We are going to have a few shows based on that topic. In terms of sports, mental health took center stage at Tokyo 2020 when Simone Biles withdrew from the gymnastics competition due to a case of the twisties that caused her to not be able to know where she was in the air and subsequently caused a mental blockage in terms of being able to execute death-defying moves. Since then, the media has talked more about mental health in athletes, particularly as they experience more pressure on the field of play and more pressure on social media. This month, we're exploring aspects of mental health as it pertains to sports, and we're kicking it off with our interview with figure skater Gracie Gold. Gracie won a bronze medal in the team event at Sochi 2014. She is an advocate for good mental health, having spent time in a treatment facility to help her cope with an eating disorder and depression. Last year, she released a very candid memoir, Out of Shape, Worthless Loser, a memoir of figure skating, effing up, and figuring it out, which it's an excellent read, I will say. And I know we've been looking at memoirs for our Patreon patrons. This is a memoir of what not to do to get to the Olympics. Very, very good book. Trigger warning, we will talk with Gracie about eating disorders, body dysmorphia, and suicidal ideation, so please be prepared. One little note about the interview, she talks about an Amber, that is Amber Glenn, who is also a U.S. figure skater. Take a listen to our conversation with Gracie.
Gracie Gold, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I'm so
excited
to meet you. Last night when I was telling my daughter that I was going to get to talk to you, she's grown now. And she doesn't get too excited about my interviews. This one, really? You're really going to talk to Gracie Gold? Does that ever get old when you hear about the little girl, when she was a little girl, was such a big fan?
It never gets old. It just is always unbelievable. I coach seminars and I meet a lot of kids that say, I started skating because of you, and that just seems not real to me. But no, it doesn't get old. Tell your daughter I said hello.
You just made her whole year. So I want to start when you move up to the seniors. You were 16 years old, and 2012 is your first senior season?
Yeah, the 2012, 2013 season.
Who's making the decisions for you? Who's picking out your music? Who's picking out your costumes? Who's controlling your schedule?
Well, so those are different questions. Schedule versus costume versus I was, as I wrote in the book, right, I guess difficult child is not an unfair statement at times. In some ways, I always had the final say simply because I just wouldn't do it, but there were a lot of things out of my control at that time. And when it came to picking programs and picking music at that time, that was something that I felt okay relinquishing some control on just because I was better with yes, no. I couldn't just pick a piece of classical music and we didn't have lyrics yet. That to me was, I didn't even know where to start. My confidence in that area was leave it to the professionals. And my costumes were a mix. I suppose my dressmaker, Brad Griffey's, and my mom in some ways had the last say. That was something my coach at the time didn't care about. And everything else was, every aspect of my life was controlled in some way, but it kind of changed who it was controlled by. So my coach at that time, he literally couldn't care at all. I could have worn a paper bag, and if it was going to yield my best skating, he truly didn't care versus Frank Carroll, like very strong opinions on packaging and even what I wore to practice, right? Like very much being the part and also looking presentable. I sometimes struggled with that because to me it was so not important. Of course, I see now in some ways it was a uniform, right? It's like wearing pajamas to a corporate office. You can have a conversation about dress code, but there is something to be said about a little bit of effort, right? And looking presentable, taking care of yourself. Frank was bigger on that. My schedule was set. I don't really know who set it, which probably says a lot about the fact that I had no idea what it was. And some of that is governed by the ice time that's available. And what I did on each of those sessions also was not something I said, which is also why you have a coach. But I do believe that, and as you get older, you're supposed to work in tandem. Granted, giving a 16-year-old the reins. This, I think, was some of my problems that developed is at times where it would have been appropriate for, like my parents or my coaches or people around me to let me take the reins slowly over the years. That never really happens. So, 16, first year senior, what did I know? I don't think I knew anything, but I thought I knew everything, which is often the problem in that age group. And, I had independent thought, but empathy was still developing, right? Tumultuous. High school girls can be typically, I would say, big personalities. Some people might call them something else, but to me, it's just the critical thought without empathy is a big thing missing. But as I grew up and as I became more responsible and I knew what was going on in my life and what was expected, when it was time to relinquish that control to me, it wasn't really relinquished. And that's where some of the problems began.
You mentioned Frank Carroll, and I do want to talk about him because he was very influential in that image, which seemed to have both a positive and a negative effect on your life. How was that working with him in terms of that, how you were going to look on the ice?
I guess I'll preface this with a little bit like my coach before Frank, and with the aggressive training regimen, and Frank with the kind of drive towards perfection and the whole package, and everyone is looking at you all the time. I have a tendency just to take things too far, right? I have a rather intense personality, and there's a lot of like addiction that runs in my family tree, and so I just have a tendency to go all the way. And at various points by the time somebody checked in and was like, "Oh, are you still doing that?" That was more of maybe, you don't have to carry that energy all the time. With Frank, I will say some of a lot of his guidance was really beautiful, especially in that age range of, I had turned 18 leading into the Olympics, and I was competing, although the Russians were on their way in that like last decade of their dominance. I was competing against Yuna Kim and Malasada and Carolina Kostner. In my first Grand Prix, I showed up in what I would consider like a typical training outfit, which was I had these black and neon yellow striped pants, like a neon yellow shirt, and I was going through a bow phase. So I had and not just a regular bow, I mean a big bow. So you could see it on my ponytail, it's stuck out on either side. So Frank was like, what are we doing? You're competing against women, you're competing against world champions and Olympic champions. And this is, Frank, I don't even know he didn't even know what to make of it. He's like, where'd you even get that bow? But I will never forget, he looked at me, it was Skate Canada, and he's like, that's my most unfavorite color. I was like, what? I think I said, like, I'm sorry. And so I changed before the practice. The bow stayed in because I was like, oh, it's black. I thought the color was the issue. That wasn't the issue. But he just is kind of, like, you look like a clown, and we need to, if you want to be on a podium with Carolina Costner, we can't be doing whatever this is. You have everything but the clown shoes. However, I really started to I kind of gave a personality to what was more of the aesthetic of this Grace Kelly Ice Princess. And I almost took that on as this weird persona. And I was just kind of reinvented myself and made a new me. I didn't do color. I just did black, hair in the bun. If, Grace Kelly wouldn't do it, I wouldn't do it, which I didn't know Grace Kelly, right? I'm just like now that I look back, I'm thinking it sounds insane. But at the time, it was very real to me. But in a lot of ways, I kind of lost myself in that process. Because at some point, if you live that every day for years and years, you in some ways become that. But if it's not authentically you kind of get lost. So my narrative was really, it was torn between this Russian and then Frank and everything in between.
But also you're 18 years old, and isn't that so typical of 18-year-old girls trying to figure out who they are? What kind of messages, besides from Frank, are you getting at that point with judges, other coaches? I mean, skating can be a very insular world, telling you have to be a certain way.
I was described as cold a lot of the time. And I kind of identified with Estella, I suppose, from Great Expectations at that time, where they inadvertently, I felt like they had created this monster, but I was then cold to everyone. And I got cold a lot, and I really was. I was rather frigid and unapproachable was another one. I thought Ice Princess at first was a good thing because I thought, it was giving Elsa. It was not. It was giving like Frozen, Barbie, completely unrelatable, like out of touch. But I thought, oh my God, they think I'm like Elsa. Like that's I'm like Cinderella. Well, before Elsa, right? I was Cinderella on the ice, and they're like, no, that's not a good thing. I got dead fish a lot. Or skating gives dead fish, which I guess I wasn't sure what to do with that one as much as the other ones. I thought, well, like I thought were almost good because I thought, oh, I'm doing it right. Because I was so lost. I was so sold on this. And also because at that point, what was even worse is that Olympic year, instead of seeing that it worked maybe for that, I skated a Sleeping Beauty, especially that first opening was rather jarring version, but it worked. And so what it told me was that everything I was doing around the training was working as well. And so if anything, with my personality, I needed to do more of it. That if I became more detached and more unapproachable and more frozen, it would continue to yield better results, is what it told me in my 18 and 19-year-old brain. Frontal lobe, not even close to developed. Not even close.
So there's no division at that time between this public persona and your private view of self.
There wasn't a division because I wanted to be her so badly. I wanted to be, because in that type A, the put together, because in fact I'm not. I'm kind of type B. I'm more of a disaster. I really wanted to be the Gracie Gold that Frank Carroll thought I could be, but it was so different than the Gracie Gold that I really was, certainly in my teenage years. And there was no, like, I wanted to be her. And again, the results on the ice were still continuing to be good. And so I just kept trying harder. But yeah, I didn't want a division. Like, there was no division because I so badly wanted to be my Olympic short program. There's the picture of Grace Kelly pulling over the curtains in like the off the shoulder velvet dress, which is why I wore an off the shoulder velvet dress. And that picture, just so perfect black and white, is what I want it to be. And I'm just not.
Is that maybe not Frank specifically, but do coaches tend to do that, especially with younger skaters, like put them into a mold and we're going to do this program and this music and you're going to wear this costume and there's a lot put on you, and as a kid you want to please or do whatever it takes to get to reach your goals. Does that make it difficult when they don't necessarily see who you are?
I think it can, but I think for me it was a mixed situation because there are some things where, there are, based on the way that you move and how you skate, right? There is certain pieces of music that are going to be better suited for you and some that aren't. And that's not necessarily, a personality flaw if, maybe that's not going to be best for you. Like, I don't think anything sexy is typically not as good for me, but like hip hop is not something that's as good for me. And that's not, I know that is not a personality flaw. And that's also separate from, the kind of Gracie Gold thing, because she would never skate to hip hop. I don't move well to it. You know what I mean? Same with, there's certain colors that someone looks better in. So you might be put in those for various costumes throughout a lot of your career, but that's also just based on your coloring or certain enhancements, right? Like Emma Stone, like not being a natural redhead, haunts me to this day. Because I'm like, oh, and you could say, oh, the industry's like caused her to, she had to find her niches or whatever. But also, I think that it looks stunning on her. I tried going back brunette right as I read in the book. It's not great for me. It just really isn't. And not a single person, literally not a single person, has seen a photo of me with brown hair and thought, oh, such a good look, right? Even if yellow is my favorite color, it's not a great color for me on the ice. So even that's one where, and I ended up wearing blue for my Olympic long program, but the first rough draft of the dress was white. And then Frank saw it and was like, oh, no, on white ice, everything, like it's just, he's like, we're really just going to see eyebrows. And I was like, yeah, because that's not a, you know what I mean? It's, so there is a fine line though. And I think Alyssa Liu does like a really beautiful job of really being authentically herself. I know that they're certainly in the judging and officials world, they're not a big fan of her smiley piercing, but also that's who she is and that's what she wants. And that's her thing, right? I think she does a great job of really being authentically herself while still doing things that are for the sport, because it is a traditional sport, but sometimes in the sport of figure skating, we are lost in time. But the word traditional can be very dicey, right? Traditional meaning we have a lot of history and there's heritage here, but also traditional can mean truly lost in time and delusional. Like, which tradition are we referring to? But I know it's interesting if the coaches put it on versus it's in the coach's best interest for you to do well. So at the end of the day, I think that most coaches are looking out for you. It's in their best interest across the board, especially at the national, world, Olympic level, for you to be your best self.
It's interesting. Well, because we have a little thing we've noticed of music enjoyment factor. And this we see more in the guys, but you can tell when somebody really doesn't like their music on the ice. If you don't like your music and you're stuck with it, what is that like going through practice all the time, having to spend hours with something that may not be for you?
It's a tough scene. I mean, let me tell you that. Between my Olympic and Firebird year, although I had a very successful season, my long program was Phantom of the Opera. Wow, I can't even remember the title right now. Oh, Wishing You Were Somehow Here Again. And like lyrics were allowed, like we tried something different and it didn't land. And not just fear, but it's also expensive to get a new program, like the time that it takes. And it also depends on when you realize that you don't like it or it's not suiting you. If it's already the fall, are we going to try to get a program before nationals? Are we going to compete a long program for the first time at the US Championships? that's not always great, right? Then we have to gamble, like, are we going to find something? Is it better to have music that you love but not be as well trained, or to just keep working the program to make it the best that it can be? But that one was, Lori and I tried something different and it just didn't land. For me, the hardest part about that was in training. It's hard to train a program that you don't like. And so we ended up reworking it several times, so at least that the patterns and, the choreography in it was, I could enjoy that to the maximum capacity, even if I didn't like what was playing, as much as I had other programs. But that was the one that stood out, of that feeling that you're talking about, of this just isn't hitting. And a lot of it, I think, comes from, we try something new and it doesn't work, right? We've all seen, from anything in the world, sometimes we tried new things and they just don't land. And that's okay. It's tough though, on like a makeup look, or, it's like a haircut, right? You have to wait for that to grow out, right? Sometimes we've all tried bangs a couple of times, and every time we have to just grow them back out. And that's my equivalent, is like getting bangs. Like, you can do some things with it, but you just have a season. You just have a bang season.
We understand that.
Well, the 2014 program obviously is probably your most famous one, and where we see all the pictures, and was the Olympics. And at the same time, you're winning a national title, you're getting signed to CoverGirl, you're getting signed to Nike, and all of this attention is coming on you. And what's happening in Gracie Gold's head as you're heading to the Olympics, kind of as a rock star?
So heading into the Olympics was not nearly as stressful as heading into that US Championships, because they actually sign you before. So you've actually signed a lot of deals or endorsements prior to qualifiers. And so you actually have to qualify, though. And for other sports, it depends on the sport how early you qualify. Some people they can know 2 years. I think we all knew, like Phelps was going, like, you know what I mean? But Olympic trials in some sports are really close to the games in both summer and winter, but skating is by far the closest. So I think I was home like a week and change, and then I went to processing in Munich, and then to Olympics, right? And then it was opening ceremony, team event. It was just that quick. There's a lot going on heading into that championships, as opposed to the Olympics felt much more relaxed to me in comparison. It wasn't maybe just an average day, but to me, then it was all good from there. In some ways, it was the actually making it, yes, as the cover girl, and it was like in People and on the United commercial that everyone is watching on all the planes all the time. So then to not make that that's what I was really stressed. That was like the big stressor.
How aware were you of the press at that point? Were you hearing it as much as you can? Obviously now there's so much more social media, but at that time, were you getting the messages of, some of the things you talk about in the book, of what people thought of you?
Some, not as much as I could have. I wasn't like searching my name on, back then it was called Twitter. I wasn't searching my name anymore, because that was a recipe for disaster, just in general. I wasn't actively looking at articles. So if there's an article anywhere that came out about me, I did not intentionally read it. But the skating world is so small, right? That you still hear and know and are aware. And some stuff just came up on my feed regardless. A lot of people would just at me in the tweet, which, like, I get, because they probably thought, oh my God, why would you never see this, right? One in like thousands. But on occasion, if I did open to check notifications, I would see. But yeah, in the skating world, everyone knows what's going on.
You were with Nike. Nike doesn't have a great reputation when it comes to being kind to women athletes. So did you have a whole lot of contact with the Nike people, and what was that?
So my relationship with Nike was uncommon in the way that I had a very pleasant and positive experience. Although I did view it as that was one of those relationships that I was able to, I don't want to say separate, but to me, a lot of the endorsements were a business deal and that they relied entirely on my results and that I never thought, they would be there for me in times of trouble, right? This was a business arrangement. But Lori Roth was my contact person, and I had a very positive relationship. I am not sure why or why that was uncommon. I don't know if it was, I wonder in some ways if it was unique because my teammate and I were like the first, I believe the like first or certainly prominent figure skaters by Nike, and if there was maybe a sense of newness to it, or the way they treat women athletes, is it because our sport is inherently probably like the most feminine? Was there something tied in there? Or was it also just the newness, right? I never had ice skaters. Like, look at the ice skaters, like, haha. But I had a really positive, but I'm aware that it's unusual, right? Like, I've heard all of the not very good stories, but mine was, I had a delight working with them.
2016, you win the national championships again. Everything's great. And then it seems like World Championships is the point where things sort of start to really spiral for you. I want to start there and kind of go through the next couple years of what was going on. So 2016 World Championships, I don't want to say what happened because that's so simplistic, but was it just not your best competition or was there something more to it?
I guess both. It was important to me. And in the grand scheme of everything, it was maybe not, I know a lot of people, it's just you were fourth. Not what's the big, I mean, yeah, like what's the big deal? And that there's, another Olympics, there's more world championships, like you've been fourth before. But to me, it was an extremely important event to me as a person and a skater. And the result there essentially caused really everything to crumble. But also at that point, the foundation of my life was like toothpicks. So it wasn't really going to take much. And I think it really showed just the lack of support, I guess, and understanding and empathy, I guess, from a lot of people, or it's like what I was feeling. And it pushed me further and further away. And I just couldn't, it just sent me spiraling. And I think that there wasn't a lot of effort to help stop my spiral at first because to nobody else was it that big of a deal. And that they kind of thought like I might just rebound because it wasn't the first event that I didn't do well at. Like I've tanked a mini events. I made a whole career off of tanking short programs and coming back in the long program. This is not uncommon, right? So I think that there was, and I see the expectation of like kind of spiral a little bit and like come back. But the spiral just kept going. And then I think by the time people realized that I wasn't just going to come back, like, to be fair, every other time, I was already just too far.
I'm already concerned that the spiral was a typical thing and nobody stopped it early, that you would spiral and then bounce back. That was a pattern that nobody was addressing.
Well, so it's a two-part because one, I do have a flair for the dramatic. Like I'm well aware of this, right? And difficulty and like big feelings, whatever you want to call them. But also in society, right? Like women are dramatic and women have episodes. And for people that have big feelings and meltdowns, there at some point becomes like a lack of understanding unless you're dealing with somebody who also has them or kind of sees, is this one of those where they just have to go, they're feeling their feelings in a very extroverted way? Or is this something different? Or is this like a true spiral that will continue downwards and there's like not a trampoline at the bottom? Because sometimes I would have a big meltdown and then we just come back, which is still, yes, is that great? No, but I don't know. I don't know what other people do. When you take a short program at the national championships, like again and again and again, by the third time, I don't know where I was supposed to put my feelings. where people wanted them in a way that would make them feel more comfortable. But that's where I put them, was out in the world, and they exploded. But this one was and just the various changes of behavior that I began exhibiting, of like not showing up to practice was a bit of a red flag, or I would have thought it was. I trained psychotically, like manically, and so then to just not show up, and it was like, well, there's lazy Gracie. I don't, that like never, that still doesn't sit right with me. I just don't understand when I exhibited this like laziness that people refer to all the time with me. When it came to my training, certainly post like a Firebird year, I just don't know where, but to just not show up. And then when it was at its worst in Detroit, I'm sleeping until like 1 p.m. That's not lazy. That's like, I mean, there's something clinically wrong. And I think that disconnect was difficult for me because I realized it just kept pushing me further, right? Because if you are exhibiting these signs and someone's like, lazy, well, now I'm even further gone because you're not even close to getting what's going on.
Let's talk about how bad it got. Because some things in the book were you didn't turn on the lights, you didn't eat for days on end, you didn't go out, no one saw you. You tell it better than me saying it.
Also, oh no, so at that time I was eating.
Okay.
That was my comfort. I was eating all the time. I was either sleeping or I was eating, because then that really showed general society is fat phobic, right? The medical field is extremely fat phobic, and the figure skating world, shocker, also fat phobic. And people get uncomfortable, when you say the F word being fat, people get very cagey and very uncomfortable about it, in skating especially, because sometimes I will say like, oh yeah, well, I was fat at that time, and I understand that BMI index like is not, but I do consider my eating disorder aside, like at that time I put on 60 pounds. I mean, that's not light work, and at 5'6", that's a, I mean, I don't know what word, because then people in skating like to go, no, you just weren't in shape. And it's just the dumbest stuff. Like, I don't get it. Because at that time, I still don't know the word. I'm like, I've asked people, I'm like, is chubby better? I don't know what. And then at that point, when I showed up to events large, then it just was like, oh, she doesn't have it anymore. Like, she's retired. Then people were like the most disenchanted they've ever been with Gracie Gold when I was larger, and the treatment that you receive based on your size in skating is profound. And people in the sport like to pretend that it's something else, like it's different. It's not. Just the treatment you receive in society is different, and the treatment that you receive in the skating world is incredibly different. I'm assuming it's the same for men. I obviously don't feel comfortable speaking for that, but I have to assume that it's the same for men in skating as it is for men in society. And so that was really kind of the tip of the iceberg for a lot of people. I really feel like, between the overindulgence, so like a lot of people say, you were just overindulging because we just can't say any of these like bad words. When I was like put on 60 pounds and I was sleeping until 1, I'm still not a big mirror person, or I'm more than happy. If I could shower with just candles, I would probably prefer that. I don't like an overhead light. I really don't. And then at some point though, I still cared a little bit though in some ways, because when I covered / removed, the one was built in, so I had to cover it, all the mirrors in my apartment. That was in some ways, I guess, like an act of self-soothing or self-preservation. But yeah, we weren't doing well. But to a lot of people, that's where then it leads into my Champs Camp story, where some of the powers that be were like, if you lose 30 pounds, you can have your Grand Prix back. And I was like, well, first off, I actually don't know if you can take them from me because they're not assigned by you. And also, that's what you took from all this, was that I should lose weight. That's the fix for everything.
Is the figure skating world still like that in a way? Because if you look at gymnastics, everyone was stick thin, and now you see a lot more strength and a lot more power. And in some of the skaters now, and maybe it's an age thing, because it looks like we're getting older skaters still competing at nationals, and it's a different body type than a child's body. Are we starting to see more acceptance of different body types in skating?
In my honest opinion, I believe that the acceptance just comes from results and also because it's becoming increasingly just unacceptable to comment, especially when there's just no reason to. But I just speaking to people and people close to, the world champion and world silver medalist, people still will refer to them as big. I mean, people I've heard, and they're like, no, we're because someone said this to me at the World Championships, and it was a fan of skating, but I still was like not sure what the compliment was to. But they're like, oh wow, like read your book, loved it, and then just talking about like the sport changing and like progressive because you could like write a book, and I was like, oh, I feel like maybe you always could, I don't know. And it's like yeah, now seeing like bigger women like really succeed, and I was like, actually, see that, ma'am, is why I still feel like the sport hasn't changed in a lot. And it's some of the calls come from inside, but actually a lot of the calls come from outside. Like there's still within the officials and within the fans, with people that view skating as traditional, and they'll often use the word classy. They're like, well, skating's, it's a classy sport. That implies a lot of things to me that are it's just certainly as an American, when we start describing institutions as classy and traditional, I am getting really nervous because I don't think historically that's not good. That's not good. And I think that as it keeps changing, people will be forced to adapt. But I also think that time will help. That's what I've always said. I think like time will help push things forward. And as Gen Z continues to age, whether or not people like it, there will be a new age of society and there will be a new age of skating where certain things, say what you want about Gen Z, but there's certain things that are not going to be tolerated. And I'd like to see skating be less traditional and like less classy.
Agree. I love a good strong thigh. I love that people look like they're fueling them. They look like they're fueling themselves properly. And that's what I like seeing on the ice. If that
They look
makes
like
sense.
every other athlete.
Yeah. And
is
they're
what
happier.
they look like.
You see people that look healthy and they look happy. They look happier.
With the exception of like marathon runners, perhaps. I'm thinking that's not. And skating is, it's both like an endurance and a power sport, and so it does. I believe it's classified as an endurance sport, but in my opinion, it should maybe be classified with the power sports. That's how they would determine, just like if you were to divide sports between one and two ways, and that's kind of, are we going for more like sprinter versus marathon runner? Like bobsledding is like a power sport, right? There's a much shorter burst of insane power, like shot put, power sport. Skating for me though should be, it like feels like a mix. And gymnastics, I believe, is classified as a power sport. And to me, what that means is like stronger and more muscular. And endurance sports have, sometimes people say they have a different look to them. And I'm like, and just the way that we dance around those words sometimes is, I just don't get it. Because instead of saying fat, what people say is big. Just like a little bit big, a little bit bigger. And I don't know, as a former like big skater, I don't feel like that makes me feel better. I don't feel more respected when someone says, you weren't fat, you were just like much bigger.
What does big mean?
Yeah, like and if anything, it just is more people being weird about it. But that's to me like the biggest check-in. And it literally just happened at Worlds with Cowrie and Alyssa. I was like, oh no, we're still here. Okay. Just I'm like, so we're moving forward. And then in some ways we're like right back here.
I feel like this is the perfect time to ask you about the Russian women, because you've said some fabulous things about your concerns about what's happening with the Russian women skaters that I love. So in terms of, I had a run-in with a Terry at the World Championships that I shared on the show. So I love to hear this stuff. So please just tell me your concerns and what you see happening from an insider point of view?
So I spoke about this relatively recently in an article involving Amber, right? Where I told people to touch grass, which was received mixed reviews. But Amber being old and like world medalists being big, quote unquote, for the sport. I just am thinking of the longevity of the sport of figure skating and comparing it. I know that gymnastics, that's another one they say, well, gymnastics. Okay, then this applies to figure skating and gymnastics. But like all other sports, I just felt with the Russian women specifically, I think and I will speak to them as a woman, like specifically, the regression that I saw, and that I'll see these in the comments of skating TikToks of people that I don't know. I have an anonymous TikTok, and so sometimes skating stuff comes up, but I watched one the other day of like hot takes or, leave like your hottest takes about like the Russians and figure skating. And I read the comments because I was like, I want to see what do skating fans actually think that they probably wouldn't tell me, or like they wouldn't just, this is true, like anonymous. And a lot of them acknowledge the push of skating back towards artistry, and that it was kind of, the sport in some ways was just so uninteresting, and that it was kind of like if you were to watch track but there were like 4 or 5 Usain Bolts, you're like, no, that's so great, and then there's like everybody else and you're just, there's this disconnect. And also about just the size and shape and the age, like a lot of people felt, if I didn't have my triple axel by 14, like what was I doing here? The sport of skating can already be very exclusive certainly from a financial standpoint, as we just talked about, like an aesthetic standpoint, an ability standpoint, an age standpoint, a gender standpoint. There's, as a traditional and classy sport, there are some exclusions with that. And so just adding in just extra, right? If you have to peak at a sport, if you're competing in a sport where at your best, you're like between 14 and 17, it's a tall order. And I just compared it to the NBA. I just compared it to, all these other sports that are much more popular. If they were full of 14 and 17-year-old boys, like, I just don't think they'd be as popular. I just don't think they would. And I know that they wouldn't, right? I don't think you can have trading cards of 15-year-olds. I don't think you can have Topps cards. I don't think you can have memorabilia of like child athletes. Like, it's very strange to me that there was this push towards that, and you saw it in what people wore to train in, right? With the tights and the shorts and the leg warm. I mean, there's just this shift within the culture, and I was like, oh, this is going to kill us.
How has not having them on the world scene been for the sport, especially when they've got like a little history of doping going on?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a little history.
Well, yeah. Very true. Hey, as long as Soviet Union has existed, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, and it was, criminal to their own athletes. And it was that no other country was able to replicate, over like 10 to 12 year like dominance, right? The US is kind of unique that we don't get like government funding for our Olympics, but there are other countries that do, and there are other countries that, you can even make a case about the US that sometimes disregard human rights for the sake of certain things. And the fact that some of those countries were like unable to reproduce like what was going on. It was insane. And I just believe that it's so negatively impacted the sport. And I haven't heard anybody complain. Is my thing on it, is I haven't heard a big to do like about it. And that to me is said at this World Championships, I didn't feel like a big absence. And I say that trying to be objective. Like, I understand that the US like performed exceptionally well, and so did the Japanese. But I found myself Googling certain skaters from other countries that maybe in my years I just like lost track of. But I was looking for, where's this country's representation? I looked out like when China stopped being part of the team event, and I was looking at like where China was. Like, I didn't even think of the Russians, if we're being honest. I was looking at like maybe where other countries were and where some of those skaters were and what was going on there. To me, that just wasn't felt, and I haven't heard anybody complain.
It's interesting and telling, to be quite honest.
What's your relationship like with skating now? You're back skating. You're back, obviously. You were at the World Championships. How does it feel to skate? Where's your head at with the skating world?
So I only skate on occasion, but I was at the World Championships on the other side. I was in the media room, very interesting experience. No, it's in a much more like I guess I would say normal place comparatively to some. I did the holiday tour with Stars and Ice, so I did a little bit of skating here and there. But it's been, I would say it's pretty normal, which like means good for me, but I think the struggle is trying to just be normal about it. I feel like people either have a really good or a really bad or like really into it or they can't even think about skating. So I just try to have like a normal relationship with it.
One of the things that I always hate, and I know we only have a couple minutes left, is when people have mental health struggles and it's presented to the media, it always ends. It always is just, oh, and then I was fine. And I
Yeah,
love that you're still
of
talking
course.
about the stuff that's not still fine. So I wanted to throw that out. I love that
No, yeah.
you still mention not still normal is okay.
Yeah, and I think, but I know what you mean. I'm sure that I think there's some people, especially depending on what their, I don't want to say issue, like their trauma or their issue or their like acronym is. Not everyone, sometimes talking about it can be harmful, like especially if you're a ruminator, but I believe that lives more in like the OCD world in particular. The audience can absolutely correct me if I'm wrong. But outside of that, yeah, there is they had their little mental health thing. Yeah, and then it's like, okay, man, anyway, so now they're doing this. And a lot of mental health doesn't really work like that. A lot of physical diagnoses don't really work like that. I kind of compare it to mental health can kind of be like an autoimmune thing where it just is, in some ways, luck of the draw, right? Some people will have, if they just don't eat dairy, it's like all gone. But some people's is chronic and debilitating. It's every single day. Some just seem to come and go. Some people just had a little dabble and it's literally gone, or it's controlled. I know certain autoimmune, like a nicotine patch, is actually kind of a newer thing, can be like really helpful to the point where some people are like, "Oh, I'm actually cured," right? But other people, though, it's an all day, every day thing, or it's a multiple times a week thing. It's like I can't do these activities anymore because of it. I try to frame it sometimes mental health with physical health because, I mean, to most people, I guess autoimmune things aren't real either. So, still working on a comparison. But yeah, they don't just go away. And for me, I'm not sure if my relationship with food or body image will ever be totally normal. I think it's unlikely. Those probably my most of all of them, like damaging trauma. But yeah, they don't just like disappear. Or if they do, I mean, then you should feel free to then talk about that though, because that's some like lovely inspiration. How did you do it? How does that feel for you? Did they all go away or just one? Like, I think it's the same with cancer. Like, if you've had a cancer scare even once, I think that even in the back of your mind, it's always there. I have to imagine. Maybe I'm just a hypochondriac, but for me, I would like literally never recover. And it's something that would just some days be more prevalent, but other days, but there would always be, like, will this come back? Will it come back at the intensity? Will it come back the same? And to me, that was more kind of like my depression, like a slow growing kind of cancer in a way. And so, although it's in remission, like just always just kind of like looking over my shoulder for it just to make sure.
We're not going to get into the details. You had a safe sport issue. Safe sport was not great for you in terms of how they handled it. Do you see them doing any better now?
Possible. In some ways, they handled it so poorly, but I also believe that looking back might have done differently, but also as the victim was at my job. Like, perhaps they oversold how much weight they would pull versus how much work I would be doing. I also think, though, that the design of the system could just be redone in a way, because in some ways, because of their limitations that it is within sport, and like when you read like the rules, like in some ways they're almost trapped. The way that they, I guess, wrote their own rules, they like trapped themselves in a box. And I have to believe on some level, like not every employee there, I believe that some actually do want to help and find that to be frustrating. And that it was, I think, just something that was thrown together post Larry Nassar. And they didn't realize that it would need, just how poor the lack of structural integrity in this whole system was. And like the design of it is so flawed that could they have done better? Yes. But ultimately, I think that they were set up to fail anyway. Like they just made a bad system, like the people that originally made it. And it was constantly changing hands and like constantly changing like the stuff, every single year or every 2 years when we renew it, there's subtle changes, but then some are the same. And it's like the website's different we can't even have the same. I'm like, why did I have to do that last year? They were not helpful at all. But I don't know if this system was designed to be helpful. I think that the people that originally designed it in a post-Larry Nassar world and did not expect, I don't know what reality they lived in, but I think that they lived in a world where there was only one Larry Nassar and that they just put this together for legal reasons. They're like, okay, here you go. And then they got, I don't know, like 1 million calls and it spiraled downhill. It was a downward spiral very quickly. Do you know what I mean? It was a failure on many parts.
They didn't know it was everywhere.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I actually don't know what they're capable. Like the capability of what they can help with, I think, is too limited, perhaps, to what what they advertise or what we all hope. And again, I just think that whoever designed the system designed it more as like to escape liability and to just be like, oh, see, guys, like we have ours, so like this wouldn't happen to us. And it wasn't actually designed. It was like a Hollywood set, kind of what it reminds me of. And so could that have been a better set? Yes. But at the end of the day, I don't think it was designed to be much more than that.
Well, Gracie Gold, thank you for that. And thank you for spending so much time with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Gracie. You can find more about Gracie at graciegold.figureskatersonline.com. On Insta, she is at graciegold95. And on X, she is Gracie E. Gold.
And she mentioned, we talked very little about the Safe Sport case that she had, mostly because I didn't want to talk about it. But she had accused a fellow figure skater of a sexual assault. And the case took 8 years to get a resolution. I'm going to write about the case in our newsletter. So if you want to take a look and read the whole story, I'm going to put that in next week's newsletter. And you can sign up for that at our website, Flame Alive. Wait, I forgot our news. FlameAlivePod.com. Questo negozio è grande.
Whoa. See, that means the online store is open.
No, it means the online store is big. Well, it just means this
right.
store is big. I'm trying so yet again.
No, it's me not knowing any Italian, really.
I am trying so hard so that the Italians will accept me as their own, and I am failing so miserably. I don't even know how to ask them to love me.
Oh, well, maybe you can buy some of their merch and they will love you then.
Well, it's Milo and Tina, which are adorable.
I will say that. So the online shop is open for Milan-Cortina. They've got mainly clothes, mainly t-shirts and sweatshirts. They do not yet have that sweet, sweet jacket that I have been eyeing that we talked about the other week. But they do have t-shirts with Milo and Tina. Thank you. I just had a brain fart there. And they are adorable. And they've got some torch-related designs that have the little swooshy infographic type logos on them. So stuff is starting to look really good. We have not yet heard where the mega store is going to be.
It could be in 17 different places.
No, that's very true. I wonder if they will have multiple mega stores.
I'm sure they will. I mean, the mega store will be in Milan, but then they'll have subsequent large stores hanging off the side of a mountain in Livigno.
Well, you will be hanging there with them.
Maybe my odd job driver from Beijing will be back to drive me in the mountains.
We've got some news from LA 2028. Did you have a thing to say about LA 2028?
No, I have no little LA catchphrase.
Okay. LA 2028 news. If you are planning to attend the games, and I know they're 3+ years away still, but if you're planning to attend, be aware that you will not be able to park at venues. You'll have to take transit, walk, bike, or be dropped off. That is according to LA Metropolitan Transportation Authority Chief Executive Stephanie Wiggins, who talked with KCRW's Danielle Chiriguayo about a $3.2 billion federal funding request for Olympic-related projects. It's a lot of money, but that request includes borrowing 2,700 buses from across the country, including mechanics, operators, wages, infrastructure, and improvements to mobility hubs.
Because for 17 days, we can fix any problem.
Oh man. It's amazing to me how the games require a ton of investment and these massive funding requests. And you wonder, are they asking for more money than they need just in case they come in with a lower amount? Do you ask for more and you settle for less? Or is this stuff that they should have been doing all along and we just we just needed an Olympic deadline to make it happen?
Well, we know LA does not have much public transit.
They have some. I mean, I'm curious to know how many people use public transit. Just they have buses, they have metros. How much do people use it on the regular anyway? I know there are perceptions of nobody takes public transportation because traffic's bad. But are there people who are big public transit heads? I don't know. Something to put on the list.
Welcome to TKFLASTAN.
It is the time of the show where we check in with our team, keep the flame alive. These are our past guests and listeners who make up our citizenship of TKFLASTAN, our very own country. First up.
At the 2025 Paris Swimming World Series in Indianapolis, Olivia Chambers won the combined SB 4 through 9 and 11 through 14, 100-meter breaststroke, and Elizabeth Marks won bronze in the mixed class 100-meter backstroke.
Daniel Romanchuk won silver in the men's wheelchair division of the Boston Marathon.
3x3 player Jimmer Fredette retired from playing basketball and has taken a job as the first managing director of the USA 3x3 men's national team.
And sprinter Kenny Bednarik will be a racer in the men's short sprints at Grand Slam Track's second meet in Miramar, Florida on May 2nd through 4th. Then he's going to fly to China to represent Team USA at the World Athletics Relays in Guangzhou on May 10 through 11. This meet will be a qualifier for the World Athletics World Champs later this year.
And if you are not following Kenny on Instagram, you have to, because he has been posting these great little videos about how he reacts when his coach yells at him or if he has to do an extra lap. And it's basically, how Kenny gets his feelings hurt. It's a lot of fun. So check that out because we adore Kenny and he's so much fun. And now I feel like he's putting a little bit more of that side of his personality out there, which we got to see by the third conversation with him. It's a lot of fun.
Excellent. And that will do it for this episode. Let us know your thoughts on the state of mental health in sports.
We do love hearing from you, so you can chat with us and other listeners on our Facebook group, Keep the Flame Alive Podcast. Email us at flamealivepod@gmail.com. And the voicemail and text line is always open at 208-352-6348. That's 208-FLAME-IT. And if you need more Olympics and Paralympics in your life, and who doesn't, sign up for our newsletter at flamealivepod.com. We'll have a link to that in the show notes.
All right. Next week, we are taking a little detour and talking with Dr. Yoav Dubinsky. He is heading up an Olympic Studies hub at the University of Oregon, and we talked with him about what that Studies hub is and other things related to the Olympics and why it's important to study them. University of Oregon is having an Olympic Studies Week, May 12th through 18th, so this is a great time to share our talk with him. Be on the lookout for that. It's really cool. He's got a lot of really interesting things to say. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, keep the flame alive.